Is this one working? Test, test. Hello, hello. Ahoy, hoy. Is Jody's working?
I turned it on. Yeah.
All right, folks. Also known as Steve. We'll get going. Oh, I like picking on the mayor these days. All right. First of all, thanks for coming. Glad everybody could make it out. I will attempt to read something Jodi has very nicely prepared for me. I hope I do it a little bit of justice, but I'll probably get some of this incorrect. Jodi joined the English faculty at EOU in 1988 and has helped to build EOU's creative writing presence on campus and in the region. She is the author of the nonfiction Drawing to an Inside Straight, the Legacy of the Absent Father of University of Missouri Press, a Willa Award finalist from Women Writing the West. Her nonfiction, fiction, and translations also appear in magazines and journals such as the Colorado Review, the High Plains Literary Review, New Letters, New Millennium Writing, the Northwest Review, the Seattle Review, Translation, the Journal of Literary Translation, Western American Literature, the Western Humanities Review, and many others. Also a translator of the Chinese, her translations of the Tang Dynasty poet Li He, Li He, are collected in The Rock's Cold Breath, Selected Poems of Li He, Ice River Press. A long-standing interpreter of the contributions of Chinese entrepreneurs, herbal doctors, and laborers to the established Eastern Oregon communities, Varon writes for the online Oregon Encyclopedia. Her translations of personal letters and documents from Kamwa Chung, Mercantile, now the Kamwa Chung Museum and Interpretive Center in John Day, Oregon, appear in Talking on Paper, Oregon Letters and Diaries of Oregon State University Press. Jodi is a recipient of the William Stanford Fellowship in Nonfiction from Literary Arts, as well as 2 awards from publishers from Literary Arts for the fine and literary arts magazines Basalt and Kalapuya she edits. Varon also co-directs low residency MFA at EOU and serves as faculty advisor to Eastern's literary magazine, Oregon East. Today, Varon will read from her larger book-length manuscript, In Progress, The War Inside My Head, Family, Memory, and the Holocaust. With that, Jodi.
Thank you for that introduction and for arranging this colloquium series this year, Rory, and thank you, MJ, for doing the PR and the poster for this talk. The genre that I'm reading today is creative nonfictions. Those of you who aren't familiar with creative nonfiction is a genre that combines personal reflection and research tools. I am, as Rory said, taking a chapter from a larger manuscript called The War Inside My Head, Family, Memory, and the Holocaust, which was and is still an ongoing project that I began during my sabbatical last year. The larger concern of The War Inside My Head is how my family dealt with the trauma of World War II in light of the destruction of my grandmother's village in Ukraine, as well as the murder and erasure of one particular woman, Esta Platt, who I seek to reconstruct in the book. The chapter I will present is a reflection toward the conclusion of the book about war memorials and violence against all women and girls. Before I begin, the title of my talk today, Your Eye Will Be My Window, is a line taken from a poem called The Angel in the Forest by a German poet named Gertrude Kolmar, who wrote the bulk of her work in the 1920s and 1930s. Your eye will be my window. Nadine Ertugrul was murdered sometime between Monday, October 12, 2015, and October 20th in Eglosheim, a small German village that borders Ludwigsburg. She was tall and broad-shouldered, strong, athletic, a pretty 36-year-old German woman with long, bleach blonde hair. Until the time of her murder, she worked as an upholsterer in the Porsche factory in Stuttgart, She had 2 daughters and many friends in the communities of Eglosheim and Ludwigsburg. The night she disappeared, Nadine was wearing black jogging tights, a black camisole, and a yellow tank top that even now police divers are searching for on the muddy bottom of nearby Monrepo Lake. Newspaper articles didn't divulge details that would suggest a struggle or captivity, but Nadine Ertugrul was sturdy and vital, according to people who knew her, capable of scrapping, as her job involved heavy lifting. She was, by many accounts, a woman who could take care of herself. Her estranged husband was questioned by the police and is not a suspect. The apartment of her new boyfriend was searched, but by the end of December 2015, he was no longer considered a person of interest in the crime. By the time my husband and I arrived after New Year's Day to work with a colleague at the Ludwigsburg University of Education, the police were calling the case cold. Before Nadine's murder, students at the university joked that nothing out of the ordinary happens in Ludwigsburg, a town of roughly 88,000 people, about 12 kilometers north of Stuttgart. Even less happens, they said, in Eglosheim, a working-class village of Turks, Croats, Kosovars, Syrians, and African asylum seekers. Before Nadine's murder, students and staff assured me that women could move about freely at night without fear of assault and harassment, but now they feel afraid. If Nadine could take care of herself, is murder the result of women taking care? On October 12th at 8:30 p.m., Nadine Ertugrul left the Eglosheim apartment she shared with her mother, her estranged husband, and 2 young daughters in order to buy snacks at the Lidl grocery outlet store on Reuter Allee. Lidl is across the street from the campus of Ludwigsburg University, where I have been a visiting faculty member since 2005. Nadine parked and locked her car on Edward Spronger Street across Reuter Allee rather than in the Lidl lot, or at least that is where her car was found. At 9:30 p.m. on October 12th, her cell phone logged a call, but that login is the only detail the newspaper revealed. Her cell phone was not found in the car or near her body. According to Lidl clerks, Nadine had shopped a bit. She did not return home on the 12th after a trip that should have taken less than 15 minutes. According to the Beitingheimer Zeitung, a small newspaper in a nearby town, on October 16th, her mother notified the police that Nadine was missing, and on October 20th, her nude body was discovered a few blocks away in a ditch between a bramble patch and a berm that rises to support the train tracks between Ludwigsburg and Marbach. Nadine's neck and throat had massive cuts, and it was assumed that the wounds caused her death. The article by Tim Hohn on October 23rd, published on the Stuttgarter Nachrichten website, mentioned in the headline only that Nadine's autopsy revealed no sex crimes had been perpetrated on her body. Nadine was found directly across the street from the university guest apartment at Reuter Allee 48, where my husband and I stay while in residence at the university. During the autumn and early winter of 2015, I lived there alone while directing a seminar at the university and researching 2 Holocaust memorial projects in Ludwigsburg, the Stolpersteine or Stumblestones Initiative Project and the redesign of the memorial for the Ludwigsburg Synagogue burned to the ground during the Kristallnacht pogrom in December of 1938. The apartment's isolation at the end of a cul-de-sac made it next to impossible to sleep without dread, rational or not, even in quiet Ludwigsburg. Night on Reuter Allee fell like a pall, and even with so much work to do and the mental space carved out to do it, night incapacitated me. Many nights I gazed into the dark, watching for the last passenger train to Marbach at 11:54 p.m., hungry for the comfortable discomfort of passengers, their brown, black, or blonde hair atop featureless faces, necks bent to read papers or books. Occasionally, one turned to glance my way, an anonymous other speeding away even as she approached. I longed to be among them, but when the train stopped at its destination, once again I would be one of those women who people remarked could take care of herself, wondering if it were safe to walk alone. Instead, I kept on, inhabiting daytime with the efficiency of manageable expectations, nighttime in a parallel universe of fear. For several days in October 2015, during which the university was closed, the front door to the guest apartment at Reuter Allee 48 dislodged and would not lock. I tied it shut with an electrical cord I anchored to the handrail leading up a narrow stairwell to the apartment. The university finally sent a maintenance team of 3 to look at the door, and each man had to try the lock and try to lift the heavy door so that the bolt would engage with the bolt pocket in the door frame, because obviously I don't know how to use a key. When Team A was satisfied that, in fact, the door would not lock, they departed. It was another day before Team B arrived with tools to re-drill the bolt pocket so that the bolt would engage and hold the door closed. Between Team A and Team B, the administrative aide also came to the apartment to see if she could lock the door and conceded that, in fact, the lock was not working and that it must have been concerning to spend so many nights with a jerry-rigged electrical cord, my method of taking care. The night I was assaulted many years before, a woman at another crime scene nearby had been bound with a similar cord and her hair set on fire after her assailant broke into her apartment and raped her. The lockless door with its knotted cord magnified a sense of dread I live with. Darkness on Reuter Allee formed a noose around my heart. When I learned that Nadine's body had been found across the street, I wasn't surprised. Even on Reuter Allee, a nondescript, peaceful street in a quiet, Baroque-themed town, terror is a real possibility. Nadine was obscured by a dense wall of blackberry brambles, which her murderer, or the person who dumped her body, would have had to part and push through in order to drop her in the ditch. He must have clutched her tightly, cradled in his arms, pressing her bare breasts against his chest to use her like a shield against the wall of thorns to keep his shirt from tearing. People gossip that Nadine's death had the trappings of an honor killing, so-called, perpetrated by a member of her husband's family or acquaintances of the family from her husband's ancestral village, who may or may not have been known to her husband or Nadine. The couple was going to divorce, amenably it seemed, according to third-hand information, and her husband was on good terms with his mother-in-law and wanted to remain close to his daughters. Nadine was in a new relationship with a man known to her husband. Likely, people said, the murderer or murderers have slipped away to another part of Germany or to another country in the EU, perhaps back to Turkey, perhaps to the village from which the edict to murder Nadine arose. Worldwide, we know that women die in the heat of passion. We know women are murdered during fits of mindless jealousy. Women disappear in the throes of war, their bodies defiled. Rape is used as a weapon not only against them, but against the communities and cultures in which they live. Daughters are left distraught and orphaned, and sons grow up with their own sense of justice and trajectory of vengeance. According to the World Health Organization, 38% of all the world's women and girls have been assaulted sexually and or physically by people they know, lovers, relatives, friends. 1,330,000,000 women and girls. more than 3 times the entire population of the United States. In this room where we are gathered, every person present is or knows of a woman or girl who lives not only in the shadow of violence, but with the knowledge that seemingly benign environments like an IKEA-furnished apartment on a dark street, a leer projected in good fun, a hand that lingers too long in the middle of your back, a catcall, a vulgar taunt, all of these can trigger a return to the core of that old fear. What is that old fear? The old fear is the realization that at any time the sanctuary of a female body can be battered or destroyed, and that the batterers remain at large. Should we wonder who among our acquaintances will assault us and who will slay us? Would the wondering make us safer or staunch the dread? Should we embrace the fear, take back the night, as protesters chant? Could a shrine with its day-by-day reminder begin to assuage our grief and help us to celebrate the life of a woman taking care? The makeshift shrine erected at the site of the recovery of Nadine Ertugrul's body formed immediately after the white crime scene tent was removed by the police in October. A sea of red votive candles spread out at the edge of the ditch, the site shorn of its bramble canes like the tresses from the hair of a shamed woman. The votive candles were the ubiquitous ones sold at Lidl for All Saints' Day, red glass cylinders encasing long-burning candles, the cylinders topped with peaked gold metal caps to prevent the candle flames from being extinguished in the rain. 2.5 months after Nadine's corpse was found, her shrine included 2 bouquets of flowers wrapped in purple tissue paper, potted heather, potted sedum people often plant atop cemetery plots of their deceased beloveds. A short wooden cross bears the name Nadine on the left side of the patibulum and the word Vaterms, or wise, on the right side of the patibulum. Yellow and blue hair ribbons wound around the stipes of the cross, Nadine's daughter's ribbons. At the base, her little girl's photos and a poem laminated in plastic. One day there was a necklace of silver beads like the ones tossed into crowds during the Fasching carnival season before Easter, wound around the stipes, but the day after, the necklace had slipped to the ground. Though I never witnessed people bending to light candles from my window's vantage, every night the candle flames flickered around the cross that bore Nadine's name. If there were only a few flames, my spirits flagged, though I never went out after dark to check the candles or the wicks or contribute a fresh votive to her shrine. Jochen Faber, who dubbed the guest apartment at Reuter Allee 48 cheerless and Soviet, was among the first to launch the Stumblestones Initiative project in Ludwigsburg after his daughter asked him one evening what had happened in Ludwigsburg during World War II. Conceived by Köln artist Günter Debneg in 1992, a stumblestone is a small cobblestone 10 by 10 centimeters. The body of the marker is stone, the face bronze. The inscription on bronze bears the name of the deceased, maiden name if applicable, date of birth, birthplace, date of arrest, deportation site, death site, cause of death, date of death. The dull sheen on the bronze markers on any European street arrests the eye and remind casual pedestrians not only of the town's vanished citizens, but of its invisible history. Though scholars of the period and the area could answer Faber's daughter, could produce a detailed list of Ludwigsburg citizens deported and murdered or removed to euthanizing hospitals for mentally and physically challenged children and adults. And though copious files had been compiled and stored since 1958 at the Central Office for the Investigation of National Socialist Crimes, housed in Ludwigsburg, the information the files contained about crimes committed not only against the citizens of Ludwigsburg, but throughout all the territory administered by the National Socialist regime during World War II, were not shared with the public. As a father, a journalist, the son of a minister, and a citizen of Ludwigsburg, Faber began the research that would lead to public discussions, films, published biographies, and Stumblestone's shrines. Gunter Debneg installs every stone himself, over 70,000 now and counting. He removes a section of asphalt, cement, or cobblestone in front of a threshold on a quiet or busy European street, in front of the home of a vanished child or adult. The section of sidewalk is replaced with a stumblestone, reset less than a centimeter above the surface of the surrounding sidewalk, so that pedestrians will feel a slight obstruction on the tips of their toes or the balls of their feet as they step on the uneven surface. Intentionally, they will stop to look down and discover a short text on a bronze plaque set into the sidewalk. I've watched pedestrians bend to read and photograph the stumblestones for my friend Harry Grenville's father, mother, and grandmother, Jacob and Clara Grailsommer and Sarah Ottenheimer, installed in the sidewalk in front of Harry's childhood home in Ludwigsburg. I've also watched pedestrians step on or roll baby strollers over the bronze surfaces without so much as glancing down. And once I watched from across the street of Harry's childhood home as a young man tossed the uneaten remainder of his dinner kebab on the sidewalk over Jacob and Clara's stones, smearing the bronze with a blob of yogurt and shredded cabbage. The stumblestone for the Bosch factory labor organizer Oscar Mannheim, a devout Catholic, is set across the street from the Ludwigsburg Palace, close to the curb rather than the threshold of the apartment in which he last lived. In November of 2015, I passed Mannheim's stumblestone on my way to a concert, a car's right front tire parked entirely over the stone. When I step near stumblestones, they make my feet ache, my steps retracing the steps of individuals who met their end in killing factories. The disregard stings, but the absence of history stings more. In the last several months, Jochen Faber's attention has shifted, and his initiative website is hosting a new forum to discuss Germany's challenges in responding to the Syrian refugee crisis. People hold opposing views and mixed opinions about the influx of refugees into German cities and towns. I'd asked Faber if he and his colleagues were following the story of Nadine Ertugrul's murder, and he responded, of course. Many colleagues in his office knew Nadine. At this point in time, Nadine is still an individual, a unique woman out of the world's 1.33 billion women and girls who have been assaulted. Her singular death has sent ripples of upset through the community. The murder of Nadine and her makeshift shrine, the humiliation of her naked corpse, were grim precursors to the violence against groups of women on New Year's Eve in Köln, Stuttgart, and other German cities. The crime against Nadine and others, the insinuating xenophobia about dark men and dark men of North African descent as the perpetrators of these crimes, seeing Nadine's shrine day after day and the red candles glowing night after night across from my apartment, I found myself paradoxically inured to the sights of the stumblestones I customarily passed. The individuals culled from the loss of so many had become again the legion of the dead, caught in the process of continuous identification and erasure. The currency of so many stumblestones fades. The memory of those who perished over 70 years ago is crowded by the casualties of newer wars and Nadine, the unwitting victim in an investigation grown cold. Is it human suffering we wish to memorialize, the fundamental precept of human dignity, the world's Nadines? Thick, heavy snowflakes fell as we arrived just before dusk on a recent trip to Berlin, a city of shrines, memorials, and walls, both visible and absent. The sidewalks were gritty with sand and fine gravel that had been spread atop the ice from the previous storm, and the next storm was just picking up momentum, its large, wet flakes dissipating before they stuck to the winding paths and soggy loam in the Tiergarten. The city around the park was still before Friday rush hour, the avenue of June 17th mostly deserted. A hallucinogenic string of colored ribbons swirled around my burning eyes, my feet rubbery, flapping as though I were trying to clomp along the path in swim fins wrapped in spurs. The slap of tires on pavement was muffled by the beating of my heart, my breath obstructed with what seemed a wad of suffocating gauze. I had wanted to stroll here to conjure something other than murder and the aftermath of war, indulge in a fantasy of La Belle Époque, perhaps, the 20th century's First World War, not yet begun, its horrors and the horrors of the next war unknown, as we strolled on the quiet, winding path. I wanted the tall, sprawling, leafless oaks to have remained untouched during the century after they were planted, rather than replanted after all of the mature trees in the Tiergarten were cut for firewood during the winters between 1940 and 1942. Two foxes darted across the path near a food concession and disappeared into the small opening between shrubs and the edge of a metal fence. Their red, bushy tails erect behind them, they ran like foxes often run, always aware of danger, always looking for cover and an avenue of escape. Except for us and them, the forest park was deserted. Violence in the city that commemorates violence on a massive scale seemed remote, even as protesters prepared to march the next morning. Coming and going from the Tiergarten, we circled the Victory Tower with its gilded angel perched on top. The angel seems to grace the park, spear in one hand, laurel wreath in the other, welcoming all of those who behold her with the kind of generosity and peacefulness a messenger from God might convey. I mistook her meaning, as the angel was first a symbol of victory for the empire of Wilhelm I after the Franco-Prussian War. The tower, with its angel, was moved by Hitler's chief architect, Albert Speer, to serve as the centerpiece for the future capital of Germania. During the Cold War, the angel became the symbol of democracy in West Berlin, and now, in yet another transformation of meaning, Berliners call the angel Goldelsa, the angel of gay pride. On our last evening in Berlin, my husband and I ate dinner at an Iranian restaurant close to our hotel. While we were waiting for our meal, a little girl dressed in a red tutu and with a silver princess's crown in her long brown hair spun around the restaurant as patrons and her parents looked on, all of us dazed with admiration for her perfect limbs, her seeming abandon, her freedom, her boldness unchecked and unhampered. On January 16, 2016, the Beitingheimer Zeitung reported that two witnesses, joggers on a dirt path in nearby Möglingen, had come forward to aid the cold case of the murder of Nadine Ertugrul by informing police that they had often seen Nadine from 2014 to September 2015 between the hours of 5 and 8 p.m., the hours of their customary exercise, conversing with a dark-skinned, 50-ish, well-groomed man in a dark suit and sunglasses. Nadine arrived jogging on foot as he arrived in a VW Passat CC from the exit off the A81, they said. Next to his rear license plate, a graphic of a multicolored striped elephant, the signet of a manufacturer of paints. They'd seen the photograph of Nadine wearing black jogging tights, black camisole, and a yellow tank top, and recognized her by her customary exercise attire. By February 17th, the identity of the 50-ish man was still unknown, and police began to speculate that Nadine's murder might have been random rather than a premeditated act perpetrated by an acquaintance. They thought their clues might grow if they offered a reward for information leading to the perpetrator's arrest, and it is likely they were right. Over time, the perpetrator of the crime against Nadine may be caught and tried, perhaps sentenced. Even in the few months since her murder, the imagined reasons for Nadine's death have shifted, and they will continue, no doubt, to shift. The immediate implied blame of those who follow the edicts of fundamentalist Islam, assigning Nadine's death as an honor killing, has shifted in the last several weeks to another dark-skinned man who may or may not be Turkish and whose allegiances have not been discovered. Now, it seems, he might have been a friend. What will we remember about Nadine 5 years from now? Nadine's makeshift shrine will disappear. The red heart balloons that had been tied to the stipes of her cross are already gone. The sea of votive candles has diminished, bouquets withered. The small wooden cross that reads Nadine and Varums will likely rot, or an overzealous unleashed dog will knock it down. There is no 35-ton victory tower looming on the skyline of Ludwigsburg or any town with a gilded angel perched on top to proclaim victory over the war against women. What is it, then, that the simple, modest shrine for Nadine Ertugrul should mark? Nadine daughter, Nadine wife, Nadine mother, Nadine woman who could take care of herself? What kind of shrine should be erected so that the great granddaughters of Nadine Ertugrul understand something about the significance of her life and death, something that preserves the dignity of the singular, unique Nadine, something that acknowledges the continuous assault against women and girls by 1.33 billion perpetrators on every continent of the globe? Where should the stumble stone for Nadine Ertugrul be installed? The curb next to the parking spot on Edward Springer Street, where her locked car was found? In front of the apartment complex in Eglosheim, where she lived with her family until the night she disappeared? Like other stumble stones, this one would bear similar information: Nadine's birth date, maiden and married surnames, date of death, cause of death. If future viewers remember history at all, the dates of Nadine's birth and death would make it unlikely that she would be mistaken as a victim of Nazi aggression. Imagine, my younger son said the other day, if there was a stumble stone for every murdered woman. Imagine, I countered, if the world's Nadines remained in our consciousness day by day, so that we had to ask ourselves how, over time, we created a world any different than the world we are likely to leave. Thank you.
Questions and such? Some time to ponder, perhaps?
Yes.
Were you doing research on the stumble stones? You were doing that prior to this event, maybe? So it was sort of in the mix already when you were there, when the shrine was there?
Yes, I was doing, I have been doing research on the Stumblestone project since about 2010. And last year, I was in Ludwigsburg expressly to talk to people who were doing the project in Ludwigsburg. In the larger umbrella of my book, I have used Ludwigsburg as a way to understand the Holocaust from a German perspective, if that's possible, so that I can understand a little bit about what a city that still exists does with memories of the past. The village where my grandmother lived was destroyed, or the Jewish part of that village was destroyed, so it's not possible to access. It's not possible to access a current Ratna in the same way it's possible to access Ludwigsburg.
Would you talk a bit about Esteplat?
Yes. Yeah, I forgot to talk about that as I introduced the larger manuscript, the war inside my head. Not only am I trying to understand the village that my grandmother left, but I'm trying to understand the relationship that she maintained with a woman whose name was Esta Plot. And she and my grandmother corresponded from the time my grandmother left Poland, then Ukraine now, in 2005 until 1942, when Esta Plot and the other Jews of the village were murdered. My grandmother had saved those letters, and when my grandmother was moved to a assisted living facility, the letters were discarded by me. And so I have always felt responsible for the erasure of Esta Plot, and have tried in this project to understand something about the world that she lived in, especially the world from 1905 to 1942, because the village that my grandmother left was completely different from the town that Ratna became before the war. I mean, when my grandmother left the village, it was entirely, I don't know what word to use, encumbered with the rules and edicts of Hasidic Judaism. There were no paved streets. It was muddy. It was boggy. It was backward. It was not electrified. And through the course of the 20th century, as I discovered during my sabbatical project, the town became as modern as any town, And so I have tried to imagine what their correspondence might have been like as my grandmother encountered life in Denver, Colorado, trying to explain what that would be like to Esta Plot, and how Esta Plot might explain the changes that took place in Ratna to my grandmother. Thanks for asking that question.
Would you mind? Is it on? Yep. Would you mind summarizing what happened to that village during the Nazi control of Ukraine?
The village was, I think the thing that was really great about my sabbatical project is that I learned a lot of information about the area and about the country that's now Ukraine that I didn't know, because I had imagined that Ratna remained the village that my grandmother and her family fled, and that wasn't the case. And so as the village modernized, it became secular in a way that it had never been before, to the point where where younger people joked about their old Zadie and Booby, their old grandmother and grandfather with headscarves and long beards and side curls and whatnot. So it was. So it was a village that was mixed, that had both Jews and non-Jews in it. Although it seemed from maps of the city that Jews were primarily congregated in a part of the city. They were in the part of the town. They weren't ghettoized. in 1941, a Judenrat was formed in the town, a council of Jewish policemen, as it were, to identify and to organize all the Jews of the village. And it was really interesting to trace the arc of one of those people who for a while I thought was the husband of Esteplat, but turned out not to be. Anyway, the Judenrat was formed in 1941, and then throughout that period from 1941 and 1942, the Einsatzgruppen, a series of German-led bands of Ukrainian nationals and army irregulars came to the whole area and assassinated people village by village. And so the Jews of Ratno were ordered to appear on August 26th of 1942, after they had spent the week prior building a ditch outside of town, and they were massacred there. There were fewer than 20 people who survived the massacre. Ratna was on the edge of a bog, and beyond the bog was a forest, and so the people who did survive did so because the citizens of the town, before they left the village proper, set it on fire. So there was a lot of, according to witnesses who survived, there was a lot of smoke in town that sort of obscured the escape of those who thought they could escape, and so they went into the nearby bog, and then they went into the forest, and a few of those people survived. Most of them went to Israel, although the bulk of the town at the time, my grandmother and her family emigrated, the bulk of the town went to either Buenos Aires or Toronto or to Denver, where my family and my grandmother's relatives went. So.
Jodi, is that practice of the stumble stones fairly widespread, and is it in Germany, or is it across Europe? That's the first time I've heard of that type of shrine, that type of memorial.
I think that the stones were first laid in Germany, and then as the project took hold and people started thinking about it, noticing what Demning was doing, it started expanding to other countries as well. I mean, there are stumble stones in Oslo, there are stumble stones in France, there are stumble stones in Eastern Europe, there are some stones. It's an interesting idea, I think, because the stones are markers for people who have no gravesite. I mean, they're markers for people who were cremated, and their remains are in mass graves. There are places in Germany, like in and around Munich, where stumble stones are not allowed, and the thinking about that, which is, I don't know, interesting. In Jewish tradition, it's not honorable to step on a person's grave. So, if you watch someone out visiting the dead, everyone is sort of scurrying around the perimeter of graves, like you can't walk over the plot itself. And so the idea of putting a stone on a sidewalk that isn't a headstone, but kind of is, seemed problematic to some communities that weighed in on the project. I don't know. I mean, I think that's an interesting objection. On the other hand, there's no marker for so many people who were there. There's no marker for so many people. So, yeah, it's one way to remember them. Yeah. Yesterday I did an interview with someone from KEOL, and he talked about the changes. He wondered about the changes in in the public discourse to talk about the Holocaust, to do these projects like the Stumblestone Project, to just assemble in a kind of committee, even to talk about the Syrian refugee crisis. And he wondered if it's the passage of time that has allowed this. And your question made me think of that, because you said something about how you hadn't heard about that project before. And a thing that I discovered last year, and probably should have known before this, is that people have been talking about the Holocaust since it was occurring, although they weren't talking about that in my family, which is part of the topic of my larger study. But they weren't talking about it in the way they talk about it now, and with so much sort of blunt forthrightness. David and I were on a train, I don't know, it must have been early in 2006, and a man sat down next to us. We started talking, we're working in Ludwigsburg. He was about our age, I think, and he said, "I didn't know anything about that Hitler thing." And I was like, okay. I mean, it wasn't a topic we were discussing. And he went on to say, when I was a boy in school, it wasn't discussed. And I mean, he was in school at the time this archive was being built in Ludwigsburg. But I think what he was trying to say, I don't know what he was trying to say exactly, but I think he was trying to communicate that there was a kind of implicit silence. Even though at the same time there was a silence, people were gathering this material. They were recording, they were researching, they were archiving, they were paying reparations to families they could find. But it wasn't a topic that a person could read a paper about at a colloquium. And I think that part of the ongoing project, the Stumblestone Project, and other projects to memorialize victims of genocide and war and crimes against women, it's part of the zeitgeist. It's part of our age. I mean, we're so public. We're so out there, as it were. I mean, we're so forthright, and we have the kind of media outlets that allow for a sort of an eerie, personal yet impersonal conversation about this kind of thing. Yeah. Anyone else?
Jill had that look in her eye.
You
All right.
you must have a reputation, Jill.
Thanks, Jodi, for all this, and thank you folks for coming. Catch you next time.